I'll keep an eye on the lobby there. See, it'll. All right, and I will share my screen. You have to forgive me, I'll be looking over to the side where it's all in a different position today. But we'll go ahead and get started. I want to begin again with reading our statement, so just bear with me, please. Our conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. All right, well, welcome. We've had a few more join in, so it's good to see each of you. Again, sorry, I'll be looking back and forth at the screen. I did want to take just a second before we go over the agenda. I hand it over to Director Starnes. I wanted to ask, would it be helpful to show where your batch of information has been loaded? Has everyone noticed the folder in your drive? Okay, good deal. Okay, so you've got that. I'll move on then. Okay, Director Starnes, I'll hand it over to you. Go ahead and take us through our role and move us on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fox. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you. Clint, I hope you all are okay in Trousdale County. Been thinking about you all after the storm earlier this week, so hopefully it wasn't too bad.
We are blessed and fortunate. We came out unscathed. We're great. We got to replace, we totaled out a bus, but we can replace buses.
Glad to hear that. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Dr. Fox had sent us some information. I think we'll review that from the questions. You should have gotten an email on December the 2nd about 5:01 p.m. that had the total BEP divided by total ADM. That amount was $51.66.51. So that's taking the total amount of BEP that was distributed for the current year, basing that on the total ADM. In a call with chairs earlier this week, Monday, an amount was thrown out for the base range of 5,100 to 5,500. So just want to go ahead and add that in there. We'll get back to that in just a second, but then you'll see the other bullet points there about no parameters or limitations from the governor outside of what is included in the PowerPoint deck. And at this time, there's no budget for purposes of planning. The recommendations of the subcommittees will inform those decisions. We did get a schedule earlier this week for local funding conversations. I think those are occurring next week. So we want to make sure that we attend those and stay up to date. Again, stressing that this is not a funding formula. This is a funding formula, not a spending plan. Excuse me. I want to correct my statement there. A funding formula and not a spending plan. The formula being developed is for public schools, which includes traditional schools, state special schools, specialized public schools, and public charter schools. And questions on the ability to pay and hopefully maintenance of effort and all those conversations will happen during the meetings next week. And there was a link provided based on all the 50 states and whether they use ADA or ADM, whether there's multiple counts, single counts. Did you all have a chance to look at that web page?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
So that catches up our questions. Are there any other questions that have come to light that we would like to add for our next meeting before we move on to our discussion? Okay. All right, if you'll click on through.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about, okay, feedback summary. We also got an email. I'm sure everybody's not had time to go through all the feedback yet, but we got an email with access to that in our drive on those public comments. And I think the timetable is before our next meeting in January. We want to make sure we've looked through that information and ready to discuss that. But looking here, potential components of a student-based formula, again, 4 areas: the base, weights or multipliers, district funding or direct funding, direct funding, and then what outcomes would be tied to the formula as well. So again, you see on the slide there that districts would not receive less funding than they receive through the current BEP. We would, again, maintain flexibility for local district budgeting, ensure that whatever is currently funding outside of the BEP is included in the new formula, and then the local match should be stable. And there's talk of a 3 to 5 year time period where kind of a hold harmless type provision there, as if the student weighted formula is approved, to transition where you would not receive less BEP funds, has kind of been talked about there. I think one thing to interject here is, I guess the question's been raised to me, and I've heard some different comments, rumors. Get your all's input there about, is there a move to take like coordinated school health, family resource centers, and those other funding streams, pre-K potentially, that are outside the BEP currently? Is there a move to move those up under this base, or would those remain separate? I think that's one question we need to have answered. Anybody have any comments on that?
Steve, I'll start to that. I feel like that's a good place for the direct funding category, is it not?
I would agree with you, yes. Anyone else? Joey?
Yes, sir. Yesterday in a meeting that we were in, Commissioner Swin said that those outside grants like coordinated school health, safe schools, et cetera, it would be an issue of whether the General Assembly passes law requiring something or not. So just wanted to throw that out there, that it was that if the General Assembly wanted to include coordinated school health, safe schools, et cetera, that it would need to be something that they decided.
Okay. Based on Clint's recommendation there, that all those funding streams that are outside the BEP right now, that we would recommend that those go into the direct funding portion. Is that the position of this committee?
Sure.
If you are in opposition, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll take it as unanimous.
Hey, I'm going to ask a quick question on that.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm late too. I was
You're
struggling.
fine.
I was struggling with the link. So when we say ensure whatever is currently funded outside of the BEP is included in the new formula, in the direct funding, give me the high points of what we're talking about there.
For example, coordinated school health is one that's a separate grant. Safe schools is a separate grant that comes to us.
So we're talking about programs that are funded by the state. I understand. Okay, I got you. When I saw outside the BEP, I didn't know if initially we were talking about additional teaching positions that a county might have. That's outside that. We're talking about state-funded programs. I got it. Sorry. Thanks for catching me up.
You're fine. Thank you. Good question. So, Dr. Fox, did you capture that as one of our recommendations that?
I did. I put that under the direct funding. I have a question. Would SRO officers fall in that category?
That's something I think SRO should be under the base, but I'll open the floor to any other conversation here.
Steve, I think that's definitely got to be there. Especially what we've had going on now with violence in our schools. We just recently had, another shooting at a extracurricular activity in our area, unfortunately. And especially with all I guarantee you, I shouldn't say that. It would surprise me to see if the number of fights in schools have not escalated this year compared to last year or the year before, just because of everything our kids are dealing with their mental status at this time. So I think it definitely has to be under there for school safety. Kids can't learn if they don't feel safe. So.
That's right.
Now, I would like to add, and somebody check me on this because I know there was others in the room yesterday, but she talked about SROs and she talked about the SRO grant. And I felt like she was talking about that would be in the direct funding bucket stream. Joey, can you help me on that?
My notes, if the SRO grant would need to move to the base because currently there is not a requirement that we have SROs.
That's right.
So it would have to be funded locally, but I agree it should be part of the base.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you all.
I may have heard something different, but that's what I
No. I just knew she had that she made that comment. You're right.
Dr. Fox, can you go to the next screen? I think it is the base, isn't it? Or the next slide, sorry.
Yes, there we go.
Okay. All right, I think the big things that have continually resurfaced, and it's in line with our BEP recommendations, and I know we're not talking about the BEP, but this is something that's continued to surface. Nurses, is everybody in agreement that this is a must-have in the base, and we would want that to be at the nationally recommended ratio at least? And I'm going to go through this just for time's sake. If you're in opposition, speak up. If you're in agreement, we'll move forward. How's that? Does that work for everyone? Okay. Counselors, same thing in the base at the nationally recommended ratio, which is my understanding of 1 to 250 versus, open up, get this wrong, 500 for elementary and middle grades right now, and 350 for high school, or 712, whatever the split is there. But recommend the national ratio of 1 to 250. Hearing no opposition, moving on. School psychologist at the national recommended ratio as well there. I know school psychologists are currently in the formula, but not at the nationally recommended ratio. So is that a must-have, should-have? Thoughts there?
I think they're really needed, but certainly we are having more difficulty with behavior than we've ever had. Our issue is we can't find school psychologists, but I do think that it's not a nice to have at this point. I think it's a necessity. That's my thinking.
I see some nods and everything, so we would have that as a must-have as well. Obviously, teacher salaries and benefits, that's obviously a must-have, and we need to continually have ways to increase those and try to get closer to at least the regional average.
Steve, if I may add, one of the documents that Dr. Fox provided was from Texas TEA, and at the very top bullet, it says increases the minimum salary schedule from $55 to $9,000. I mean, I would like to pitch or get somebody's ideas. Can we say here that we expect teacher salaries to go up for the minimum salary to increase as a result of going to this new funding formula?
I think we can.
I think if we're going to go this far out, teachers need to get some more money from it.
Right now, the state minimum salary schedule was raised to 38 last year. Is that correct?
Yep.
So do we want to say 40? Do we want to say, anybody have
42.
42? Now, there's also legislation that was passed. Representative Cochran, you might be able to help with this. There was legislation that was passed that anytime the per unit cost of the BEP was increased, the state minimum salary schedule would increase the same amount. So for example, if the per unit cost increased 4%, the state minimum salary schedule would increase 4%. Representative Cochran, can you speak to that, please? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, hey, and I'll be honest with you, I would have to look back and get a little bit more detail on that we passed. Right off the top of my head, I don't have that one. I've got a few of them memorized. I don't have that one, but I can get that to you. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. But that's my understanding that legislation was passed to that effect. So again, potential policy issue there, but state board sets a state minimum every year. So how's that work with this formula? If we go to this formula again, do we look at leaving that intact? And it's not really going to be a unit cost, but it is going to be a base salary for a teacher that's included in the formula here. So do we want to recommend that a base teacher salary would be $42,000 and that would still tie to the previous legislation that the state minimum would increase for like amount, whatever that percentage came out to be?
I'm for that.
Okay, we have a recommendation. Anybody opposed? All right, and then it's got flexibility for facility funding and or deferred maintenance. I think we need to get some information there on what is the industry standard or whatever as far as, or what's the national recommendation on square footage. Because I know a lot of us are faced with schools that were built in the 70s or earlier, and that needs have changed through the years with our new program requirements, with RTI and now high dosage tutoring and et cetera, all the things that we have going on. So trying to research what is a recommendation for square footage based on per pupil and what kind of cost is there. I'm not real familiar. Is anybody familiar with Georgia? The way it does, I think theirs is very progressive as far as funding facilities. Maybe we need to get some research there.
Steve, can I add something on that?
Yes.
And depending on what county you live in will depend on the per square foot it costs to build too. So
Right.
It's substantially higher. And I hate to say this, but I believe that Shelby County has the highest county to build a school in. So it'll be different depending on where you're at. So I just want to make it equitable. And if the national average or whatever that be, or if it, compare ours to like Trisdale, I'm sure it's a lot cheaper to build a school in Trisdale County than it is Shelby County. But, just want to make sure it's equitable in that, and it could help maybe pull up that lower end for Trisdale to be a happy medium. You know what I mean? Something like that. I think it's about.
Hey, I don't know what it costs to build a building anywhere. I mean, I haven't built a building in a while,
Yeah.
but Wilson County was sitting beside us yesterday, and they just built a school, and it was $300,000 a square foot. I mean, 300 a square foot.
So
Which is about $100
Steve,
increase.
$300 a square foot.
So if we took $300 a square foot, and if I'm not mistaken, Georgia does something that they look at replacing schools after 25 years or something that
wow.
they are looking at. And I'm just bits and pieces here. I'm not really up on this, but I think it's worth checking into that something's built into their formula that they cost that out over a 25-year period.
Hey, Steve, let me pitch this. This is not going to get any legs, and I don't even know if I want it to have legs, but I just want to say this. One of the things that we do with our county commission is we try to get them to pay for our buildings and our deferred maintenance because it doesn't drive up MOE. So sometimes like not having that in our regular revenue stream
General
is
purpose.
have them to take out bonds to do that work.
And I'm sure that'll probably come up through the local funding discussions next week or whatever. But yes, I understand what you're saying, Clint, that's outside. If
Right.
they're going to replace a roof or something and they give you that money, then it doesn't factor into your maintenance of effort. Because it's actually remains, I guess, in their budget as part of their capital or
It does.
capital outlay.
Yes, sir.
Anything else on base? We'll try to keep moving here and get as much done as we can today.
Hey, Steve, I know I'm talking a lot, and I'll try to shut up, but one of the things I thought that really came, the biggest thing I heard in there yesterday was talking about building in an annual inflationary measure for the base. That base is not the same base 15 years down the road. So building in an annual inflationary measure for the base.
Right, a cost of living increase to, so that we wouldn't stop. I heard the same thing.
Did you like that, Kathy?
Yes, I absolutely like that. We do need a cost of living, a inflationary way to keep up with current costs.
Is there a recommendation that we tie that to, and I'm hunting for the term here. It's not coming to me. There's a term besides COLA for that, but it's tied to factors in GDP and all that stuff. Economic term. And anybody know what I'm trying to say?
No, it's not coming to me either.
Okay. If anybody has an epiphany there, just speak up as we go along. All right, weights. I think that everybody is pretty much settled on students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged must-haves as weights. Is that everybody in agreement with those three must-haves? Hearing no opposition now. Did you raise your hand and want to speak, Clint, or you're?
No, I agree. I'm in.
Okay. I guess one thing I would bring up on economically disadvantaged with the change in the definition of that to only direct certified kids, I think we're missing a lot of the working poor there. I would like to see us base that on students who qualify for free lunch or free reduced lunch. Another thought process here is kind of sticking with the at-risk definition that's in the current formula, that includes direct certification, homeless, migrant, foster kids. Again, anybody have thoughts on that?
I think you're in the right space.
Mhm.
I think we're, like I said, I think we're missing a lot of kids just looking at direct certification, because in a rural area, you don't have as much access to services and being able to get those SNAP benefits and those type things, because it may be just something that you don't have transportation to go and sign up for. Or, the community itself may be trying to help support those folks, and they just don't reach out and get those benefits. So, and especially where we've been able to, I think we're going to see that start to come in, where we've been able to feed kids free, which has been a great thing during the pandemic. I think that's going to hurt our overall number that are signed up for free and reduced lunch. So it's going to affect that. So having a good definition of what economically disadvantaged means, I think, is going to be critical for us. And
Steve,
again, I'm
Steve,
talking.
when they changed that definition years ago, we dropped 30%
Yes,
from
sir.
where we were to the direct service. And I'm telling you, people in Hartsville didn't get richer during that time.
Exactly. And we still know that those students, even though they're not direct cert, they still have challenges, and they come to us with less prepared for school and everything because of the poverty issues. Anybody have any insight to offer into that? Okay. Other suggestions have been a rural. I think I understand the commissioner referred to it yesterday as rurality, sparsity, fast growing. That is built into the current formula, that you have more than 2% growth each year, then you would get growth payments during the year. Charter enrollment, and again, I would defer to our folks who may have charter schools in their county or area. I'm not familiar with how that would be a weight there. So
What is sparsity? I mean, what's the definition of that?
Lack of resources.
Hey. Yeah, and so the definition of rural has been, rural refers to the federal definition of being within so many miles or falls with a defined circumference of a larger city center. And so sparsity would speak to the more transportation challenges and costs that it would take to be when you are rural. So we know some districts that we know to be quite rural are actually not meeting the definition, but because of the size and the geographicness, especially East Tennessee, it's very sparse. It's hard to get to those. The miles may not meet that criteria, but the sparseness to get to resources.
I just wondered how that's determined. I mean, how they put a value to that. I don't know.
So, for example, what you're saying, Dr. Fox, is if you are in a large geographic county over 600 square miles or something to that effect, it's going to cost more, and you're going to have to run buses to travel farther, those type things, which factors into it.
But if you put transportation as a separate component, then do you need sparsity and put it in the transportation piece?
Well, right now, transportation is part of the formula. So again, does that go back to the base, or do we recommend separating, as you're saying, Clint, separating transportation, looking at that based on that ADT and those type things?
Or both.
Well, I know this summer, we did that summer learning camp and our transportation was separate. And I don't know. I thought that worked quite well for us. It was in a bucket by itself.
Right.
I'm just talking though. I'm just,
I understand. And I'm a strong proponent that I think regular education funding should be funded the same way as special education transportation. But meaning that
Everyone.
special transportation, you get funding for every mile traveled,
Mhm,
whereas for regular ed transportation, it's only 1.5 or greater.
mhm.
So, you know, we all know very well that in today's times that you have a lot of challenges. There's not sidewalks within 1.5 miles of the school. There may be registered sex offenders in that area. Just a lot of dangers that weren't had to contend with 30 years ago when that was put in place. So I think that all transportation funding should be every mile. Quiet bunch today. All right, some other areas if we want to consider. So again, thinking about must have, should have, nice to have. What's the fourth one, Dr. Fox?
I will scroll us back and forth. We can see. Yeah. So categorizing things in the base that are for sure a must have, and then should have, nice, and a long shot. And then even taking each of those categories, direct funding, and thinking about it in each of those
Okay.
outcomes, weights.
All right. Thank you. Long shot. So if we go back to our base there, we're all in agreement on the, I'm sorry, weights.
Yeah.
Sorry, weights.
Okay. Yeah.
Economically disadvantaged, or again, arriving at that definition. Students with disabilities, English learners, all must-haves. Again, getting in more, do we need to have tiers within those? That, do we look at a different tier for options 1 through 4 than we do options 5 through 8? In special ed, for example, getting into that space, English learners based on, you know, what year within the first 2 years is at a higher level as they progress through the steps there as an ELL student. Is that different funding levels, or do we just have one multiplier for each one of those? I think that's something we need to think about and try to come to a recommendation. I went through and looked at the weighted student formula yearbook for 2019 and looking at, for example, Atlanta Public Schools has a weight for English language learners of 0.1, and that's the base. Special education would be a 0.03 is what they have. Poverty looks different at elementary, middle, and high. In their formula, it's 0.5, 0.45, and 0.6 going across elementary, middle, and high. Looking at Houston Independent Schools, they have an at-risk multiplier, and it's 0.075. Special education is a 0.15. English learners is a 0.1. Looking at Indianapolis, which is Indiana's supposed to be our closest demographic mirror. They have a free and reduced lunch multiplier of 0.125. Special education is 0.23. And they do not have an ELL multiplier in their formula. Looking at Metro Nashville, their special education is a 0.5 to a 7.25. Again, based on student needs. Poverty is a 0.5. ELL is a 0.21. So again, just trying to get in your mind what those recommended weights should be over and above the base. I think it's something. Thinking about class sizes, I know it's been talked about, and you'll see it on the screen there for K2 or K3. I think high school has just as many demands with all the ready graduate stuff we have to do. So do we consider a weight for high school, or do we consider a weight for middle school to take into consideration your teaming concept when you're trying to schedule in middle school and the challenges around certification in 6th grade versus 7th and 8th grade when you have a 6 through 8 building. So are there any thoughts on grade level weights? Or
I'm not necessarily, I agree with you that there are just as many, there are just different needs at the high school than maybe the elementaries, especially primary.
Mhm.
But I want to be sure that the current law that protects class sizes or sets those as maximums, I want to be sure that doesn't get left out within the funding portion. That would require a law change, but I know that it was stated yesterday the states that we're looking at as models, they do not have that as part of it, and that's part of something that makes Tennessee unique, and that's critical that it stay within the base.
so keeping both averages and max, or class size max per school, what's thoughts, Joey?
You know, that's a good question. And you look, when you're in a small district or even a larger district with a small school, if you're looking at the district average, it can skew numbers. So really, I think you almost have to look at school averages, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I think you could have 27 students at one school and 33 students at another school, which is that let me get this in my head here just a second, which would be 60 students. And looking at that would fund 3 teachers at a district level. But in reality, when you have that in 2 different schools, because the class size max is 25, you're going to have 2 students at the school with 27 students, and you're also going to have 2 teachers at the other school with 33 students. So we're actually, in actuality, we're funding 4 teachers because of those requirements. And I agree that don't need to be removed, but that's the difference between a district and a school level model there. Anybody else on that one? So we'll come back to that. Do we want to tackle the rural sparsity, fast growing, or charter enrollment, assigning any value to those right now, or we want to think about that and come back? Hearing no comment.
Well, I mean, I'll just throw it out there. I would, I'm looking at these as must-haves, and I would delete the sparsity and the charter enrollment. I'll just pitch it out there on the table.
So you want to say those are long shots, or those would be nice to have, or?
Long shots. That's
Okay.
what I think.
Director Starnes,
Yes.
this might not be the appropriate time, but when looking at the multipliers, is it the recommendation that the multiplier would be associated with the base on an annual basis, or would it be compounded over 10 months? And my question is, if it's, I'm just going to make this up, $7,000 for the base and the multipier's 0.5 for any of these components, is that just a one-time calculation, or is it multiplied for every month that we're in school or compounded?
I think it would depend on what we decide, whether we're going to do an October 1st count, whether we're going to do some kind of variation of what we do now, where we take an average of 4 months. I think that depends on that, but I think it's just basically if you have the 5,000, for example, base, and you have a 0.5 multiplier, that would be an additional $2,500 for that student. That's my understanding of the way that would work. Does that answer your question, Dr. Watson?
Yes.
Anybody disagree with that?
All right, I almost hate to ask this question because I'm sure it's a really easy answer. So when we're talking about weighting these things, so exactly when we have charter enrollment there being weighted, is that if you're in a charter school, you get more money than you get if you're in public school?
That would be my understanding, yes.
That seems not fair.
That's why I said it was a long shot.
I'm thinking a long shot too.
Okay.
So I was assuming that the charter enrollment meant if you were in a district that had a charter school, and this may be exactly what I may just be restating exactly what you said, but if you're in a district that has a charter school, and there's been a certain amount of those students go to the charter school rather than the public school, that you would get somewhat of a bonus in funding. Is that exactly what you just said?
Yeah, basically, yes, sir.
Okay, I got you.
I think what he's saying is, since this is a student-based formula,
Yeah.
a student, just as he said, a student attending a public charter school, if there's a weight here, that student would generate more funds than a student attending a regular public school is what this would do.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that's how I was understanding it too. Thank you.
I guess really what and just being as doing some more work here, looking at that. So is that an incentive for parents to send their student to a charter school?
Absolutely.
I guess that's where I need more. I guess I need to do more looking into that myself. But really, that's what I'm asking: is that an incentive? Is it an unfair incentive?
And I guess I was assuming that it was in there to make up for any lost revenue that you, right, as a public school, if you lost students to a charter school, then that's to make up for that revenue. Is that, I'm assuming that's why it was proposed. Is that how y'all took that as well?
We're thinking the same way, just saying it differently. Yes, sir.
I got you. Okay, I got you.
My understanding is the charter enrollment is just as they've received additional dollars for capital outside public schools, then this would be because there's not I take it a different way. Instead of giving extra money to the system where they left to compensate, I see this as money going to this public charter where they're currently attending, but maybe I'm wrong.
That's how I see it too. And so I think we need to be really careful here. I don't know why we should give them a weight that would give them more money than the public school. I know yesterday's meeting, Dr. Schwinn said several times, this is K through 12 public schools. And of course, we're talking about public charter schools, but I think we need to figure out what the intent is behind this. It doesn't really feel fair to give charter school students extra money because they go to a charter school.
Yeah, I think it's a long shot either way. Just to be honest, I don't know that that's going to make it into the formula, regardless of how it's intended. In the same way, I don't know that a district, if they have various schools that aren't performing well and a charter school was able to come in and do well, I don't know that school system should be rewarded for the amount of students they lost to a charter school. So either way, I think it's probably a long shot, but we probably should figure out what they mean by charter enrollment.
Dr. Fox, can you put that on one of our questions, please? You already have. All
I've
right.
got it.
Oh,
Yes, sir. I was just, for someone who's battled charter schools as a principal and now as a superintendent, my concern is if you give them extra money, then let's say after the 20-day period funding and that student gets kicked out, where does that student have to go back to if they are removed from that charter school? They have to go back to their base school, correct? Is my understanding, which they do all the time, but they keep the not only that funding for that student, but the additional funding. So you're rewarding I've got a really bad taste in my mouth right now because we just had a charter school here in the Shelby County area. Their administration just got caught embezzling $400,000, of funds between three of them. And there's no data that shows that charter schools are better than public schools. And here we are on talking throw extra money towards something that has a track record of not being better for our students. And I thought, this whole committee was about doing what's equitable and fair across the board. So I'm not really sure why we're even arguing charter enrollment or why is it even in this situation. I just feel like this is another way of opening up some other issues that are on some other people's agendas that's going to affect public schools. And I'll say it. And if I get put in timeout again, I understand it. This is not a backdoor to a voucher. And if we're going to say that charter schools are going to get additional funding for being charters, that's what it's going to open up to. You're encouraging our public school parents to seek other revenue or other avenues for their children to be educated. I just don't think it's right. But that's my personal opinion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, Clint, you've got your hand raised.
yeah, I think one of the things to think about for charter schools is to give them some outcome rewards. So if they do well with their charter school, then they could get a bonus for outcomes, but don't give it to them in the base.
I think if they're going to be called a public charter school, they should be funded the same way as a public school myself. But if they're going to receive public funding, they should be funded the same way a public school is. But that's my 2 cents. But for sake of time, let's move on to the next slide, please. Additional dollars. These are some of the suggestions based on feedback: financial literacy, middle school CTE, innovative high schools, extended school year, RTI, high dosage tutoring. I know that some of the previous things are the ACT and ACT retake, the 4 dual credit courses, the summer program remaining separate that we were required to do, and I'm with Clint that we have a separate transportation component as part of that summer funding. We made a recommendation as direct funding earlier in our discussion today that we wanted to add here, and Dr. Fox has that. So any strong feelings here on the additional dollars or anything we're missing that you think should be considered here?
High dose tutoring is effective, but it's expensive.
Exactly. Now, there was talk originally, and Dr. Fox, this may be another question. Will CTE be a component of the base, or are we looking at funding CTE separately, not only for middle school, but for high school as well? I think that's a question we need answered.
Okay.
Okay.
This one has mixed thoughts there, but I have more and more needy kindergartners that would benefit for preschool. So this group may not want to put expand preschools into additional funding, but I see it as a growing need in within my community.
Well, I think here we're advocating for K, coordinated school health, safe schools, Family Resource Center, all those current fundings that are separate, they would fall here. Is that?
Okay, this may not be the place.
Or no, I'm sorry, you're right, Joey. I'm talking about direct funding. I'm sorry. I'm talking about direct funding. Sorry. But this is confusing because it does have the ACT retakes and the dual credit courses in the notes at the bottom, but this previously had been called direct funding.
Yeah, this is still, it's those direct fixed costs that you would want to identify for a specific focused expenditure. So to your example about transportation specifically for summer programming.
Okay, so this would be funding then.
Yeah, earmarking funding for that specific person. So, Joey, to go back to your question, so would pre-K, were you suggesting it fit here or a question back toward the base, Dr. Vaughn?
Joey is fine. And, it may be more appropriate at the base. I was just looking at innovative high school models, adding CTE, those kind of things. So it just that may be something that comes at the base level rather than additional funding.
Okay.
Looking at the next slide. As we've talked about outcomes, EPSO completion, dual credit, dual enrollment, AP course completion, and passing an exam, industry certificates or certification, work-based learning completion metric, closing the achievement gap, reading proficiency, and then differentiated compensation support. And I guess from those comments, just looking at one here, differentiated compensation support, is that for the hard to fill positions such as high school math, science, foreign language, special education, or do you know what that one actually means, Dr. Fox?
So it's my understanding that the outcomes would be based on that, like performance, things you're trying to incentivize and outcomes you're looking to increase. So that might be an area that you would also want to increase, would be that differentiated pay for, like you say, specific hard to fill areas or areas that have been difficult. I guess that connects back over to the achievement or a target that you're trying to move closer toward.
Or a 4 or 5 TVAS level or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have comments here? Clint? You're muted.
We've done a lot of work over the years in the strategic compensation space. And one of the things that makes sense if someone wanted to go this way, and since the revenue is outcomes based, so you cannot take a non-reoccurring revenue and try to make it happen on a reoccurring expense. So one of the things is if you wanted to tie it to EPSO completions, AP completions, industrial certifications, then those extra bonuses, revenue streams that would be very variable from year to year could be used as bonuses for those teachers and leaders that are a direct part of that. That would make sense to us, is what I'm saying. But we couldn't put it into salary.
I'll throw out a couple of things here, maybe in this space. Work keys exam. I know we talk about industry certifications, but work keys is not tied to a specific area, but I know there's a pocket down in West Tennessee, and there's starting to be several communities in East Tennessee here that have become work-ready communities where they've met goals, and that's one of the basically at Site Selection Magazine, that's one of the variables that they're using to promote for economic development and those type of things. So work keys, gold level or higher certification potentially, and then I understand that the work ethic diploma recognition has went statewide now, and that's been reconfigured. So is that something that a student who becomes a work ethic diploma recognized student, would that potentially be an outcome as well?
Those kind of feels like long shots to me, where, tied to the accountability system right now, the EPSOs and the industrial certifications definitely feel aligned with the accountability model that we presently have.
Well, one thing on the work keys, I guess, we recognize a 21 on the ACT as an automatic qualifier when a gold level work keys equates to a 23 on the ACT, but it's not recognized. So I think that's something we need to consider. And I know I've advocated for this for 2 or 3 years now, or maybe longer, but I think it's worth conversation.
You said a 23 equals a 21?
The work keys gold equates to a 23 on the ACT.
Okay, gotcha.
Basically, the work keys gold says you can do over 93% of over 20,000 plus profile jobs that you're qualified for those jobs.
Yeah. I really don't know enough about the work keys to speak to it intelligently.
I don't know that I do either, but I try to.
Right.
Anybody else, anything to add here that's not on the list, or? No, we're fast approaching. We'll move on to the next slide.
Steve, I would like to say one thing about the AP.
Yes, sir.
I think it's got to be tied to pass rate. There's just too many people taking it, but our pass rate across the state is really low. I just advocate for the pass rate instead of completion.
Okay.
So I think you've been engaging in the discussion from each of those and kind of placing them in those bucketed categories. I can kind of read through what I've heard you say, if that's helpful.
Yes, ma'am, please.
All right. Or it's messy. If you don't mind looking at messy, I can show you what I've actually written, trying to move them, and it's small. So, yeah, give me a little grace on that. But so what I heard you say in the base for some must-haves, this is what I captured. And then in the weighted section, so getting to some of those weighted categories, the language around economic disadvantaged and the expanding that to include beyond the current definition. Not much conversation around students with disabilities, so just capture that as is. You can certainly edit. I'll send this over to.
One thing to add on students with disabilities is consideration of tiers based on option level.
based on what? Oh,
Option
level.
Option level basically is the amount of services they receive.
Gotcha, that's right. Okay. Direct funding then. So capturing that language again, those that are currently out of the funding stream, and that was referenced. So moving those here, all those on the slide. Getting a little background noise. And then your transportation for summer learning, the high dose tutoring was mentioned there. And then things that I pulled down toward long shot, I heard sparsity and fast growing. I'm not sure I see this. Okay. That would still fall in a weighted value, but it was under the long shot category. Did that feel right?
Yes.
Okay, and then these were just my rough notes. I'll spare you there, but then I highlighted a couple of the questions. I don't know that we actually pulled that up into a category, but class size conversation, transportation by the mile, expanding pre-K, some conversation about clarity. How is that reading? It sounded a little bit confusing on that. And then thinking about strategic compensation, how we maybe tie that to either a fixed cost or a direct funded, or where that might connect for you. So continued consideration there. Yep.
Okay. Does that capture our conversation today? Anybody have anything to add? Okay, moving on to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. And that's the process I think you've gone through real well. Then our last slide is, and that's what our time is at, we're at time. So same place on Teams, in your link in your folder and on your calendar on January 5th. I will note just the visual on this document, I thought it helped me a little when I pulled back to say, I'll scroll, make anyone sick. So as you're reviewing feedback that is in the batch, the folder, we'll kind of categorize, and we'll use this space to see what you also then sifted through and thought, oh yes, that coin size is what we were thinking, or that would go in each of those categories. So that's just the document then that I'll piggyback off of for next time in January.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, if you would start looking at, I know there was a link in the information that we discussed or that we were sent that looked at 50 state comparison. That was the Education Commission of the states. I think we needed to start thinking about whether we do this on a prior year, whether we do it across multiple points, whether we do it on a current year, October 1st, what our recommendation there is. I'll
see if I can drop that in the chat for you.
Okay. And so if there's suggestion on weights, talk with your folks and people in your region and everything, try to get information on where we want to go as far as weights. And as I said, if you want to take the time, the weighted student formula yearbook, usually that has about 20 different schools or states that use this type formula each year, and it looks at the weights they've applied. So, and I think you sent us another one too as well, Dr. Fox, didn't you, about that had some weights or something?
I'll have to double check. Is it the one that you, actually you had surfaced in our session 2? Was there a link?
Thinking about here then, okay.
Yeah, you found one that had some good a robust review as well. I can circulate that back out.
Okay. Before we adjourn, is there anything else that we would like to have for our next meeting, or anything that we need to do differently moving forward?
I'd like to have Dr. Fox's typing skills. That's pretty impressive, by the way. Just great job on the notes. Seriously. Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Fox, I think
Thank you.
from the chair's meeting, one thing I've almost missed was that requesting an expert. If we need to make that as a formal request, I think it would be somebody, and what I'm referring to is on the chair's meeting earlier, they have identified some folks that have PhDs, and this is the area they live, school funding models and everything, and maybe having them to come and share with us before we get to the final recommendations. But I'll make that in the form of a formal request. Anyone else? Again, thank you all for your time. I know we ran just a little bit over, but again, appreciate each of you and your input, and just want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you in January.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.